And that's the kind of care and compassion that we need to share with the 2,000 staff members who are not receiving a living wage, who can't hold their heads up high and have to work multiple jobs so that they can get enough food on the table and they can proudly live amongst their own and not suffer the consequences of their kids not being able to go on school trips because they're too embarrassed, they can't afford them, so they keep them at home. So there's more issues around here. There's issues of why our kids are truant, and they're truant because we miss the days at school when the trips are on, because we can't afford, our families can't afford to send them. So I want to congratulate you on wanting to go out and consult on the living wage. I think this council is setting a wonderful precedence and saying we care about this community. And home ownership rates amongst Pacific families is below 30%. So whilst home ownership is a major issue for Auckland, it has been an issue for Pacific families since we arrived in New Zealand in the 1960s. It is high time that we started to address these issues. And so I want to agree with Councillor Casey on congratulating you also on stepping forward on the issue of homelessness. We are seeing it all the time in Hunters Corner in Papatoetoe, we see it down the main street of Otahuhu, and we're seeing it in parts of Otara. And that is the kind of thing that makes people feel low, feel insecure. It makes people feel like they don't belong to Auckland. And we have an Otara at the moment where people are selling up and moving away because they can't afford to be here. A living wage is going to help our people. A living wage is going to put food on the table. A living wage is going to ensure dignity for those families in South Auckland who can't hold their heads up high and are on the run now and leaving Auckland because they don't have the dignity to stay. We can deal with homelessness, and I want to congratulate you for putting these two issues forward, and I look forward to the consultation that will happen as a result. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'll be quick. I don't want to prolong matters, and I would join some of the other councillors in commending the generally progressive nature of this mayoral proposal. The thing I like about it is that it acknowledges a number of the realities on the ground. We had a good debate that it just passed, acknowledging the reality of rates and people's capacity to pay, and the importance of striking a fair rate that carries Aucklanders along with you. And I think that same reality has been acknowledged in respect of the living wage and the fairness and equity that signals. And I would just mention that the living wage is predicated on providing the basic necessities of life for workers and their families. So I think that's a humanitarian response more than anything else. And in our council, and an organisation that is actually, if it's compared to other public entities, is actually more numerously represented in the higher end of the wage bracket. I think it's only fair that there's some balance to the people that are in the bottom one. I don't have too much sympathy for people like RFA in terms of dispersal of budgets. If you can increase projects from $12 to $70 million, I think there's probably a little bit of room to pay people a living wage. The same goes for the proactive leadership in homelessness. Again, signalling that it's no longer acceptable to try and pretend that this increasing problem doesn't exist, or to fine the destitute, as was the response of some councillors in the previous administration. I would just say, Mr Mayor, to be fair, while I've commended that very progressive and very responsive response in all those areas, I can't really let it go by without acknowledging my personal disappointment at that last lack of progressiveness when it came to the issue that we tried to get on your mayoral proposal the other day to do with chemical sprays, which has a similar community concern and a similar interest from people in the council making an appropriate response. And in that respect, the rather belligerent endorsement of a pro-chemical view was a bit disappointing, but I'll leave that for another day, and it's not going away, and that will be coming back. But overall, like the other people, I think this is a proposal that would find a good response in Aucklanders, and particularly to those more humane view of what it means to live in Auckland and how we should be looking after people as a whole. I think we will be surprised at how our city as a whole responds to the reality of doubled house prices and of those people at the bottom end of the scale who are struggling to survive. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I just want to commend, it was left on my seat, the paper that's been circulated, and I was having a read through this at the start of the meeting. And I think that I just wanted to draw and acknowledge a couple of the points in there. On page 24 of the report, picking up on Professor Ash's point around the impact of the harm suffered by children, the longer they spend time on a lower income, and that's absolutely correct. And I see it every single week in my ward, and the impact, and it's a disproportionate impact on Māori and Pacifica children in particular, who are growing up in disadvantaged households and whose life choices and life opportunities are diminished because of the circumstances of where they come from, where they're raised. And that's not something that this policy, the living wage policy itself, is going to necessarily be able to address, but it is a useful contribution for those households that are living on very, very modest wage and salary, where part of the household income, or maybe all the household income, is derived from the wage and salary working for Auckland Council. The point is picked up and captured on page 26 about the disproportionate number of low-income families, Māori and Pacifica. 60% of Māori and Pacifica wage earners earning less than the living wage in 2014. That is an astonishing number and a very sad indictment on where we have got to, where there is such a structural imbalance. Now, I didn't actually come to this council to lead the charge on this issue, but as I've said before, it's embarrassing to think that there are people who are earning so little, and they are affected by that. And so I think that if we are going to do something for those people, then we should do it immediately. And I do want to acknowledge the work that has been taking place to try and bridge that gap through the social equity principle. But I think that there is a need here to simply, as a point of departure from the previous council, the previous mayor, who I don't think was forward-thinking enough on this issue, is to simply make the commitment now and go for it on the living wage debate. That is a very reasonable position to take. Your Worship, I just wanted to make a point with respect to the Housing Infrastructure Fund. The Housing Infrastructure Fund is not going to enable all of the future urban development at the edge of the Auckland periphery. The Housing Infrastructure Fund is woefully inadequate in funding the bulk transmission infrastructure needs that Auckland will have in the future. And that the kind of quantum of costs that we are facing in that space, in ensuring that the greenfields have the infrastructure necessary to accommodate all the growth that Auckland will face, is far beyond what has been proposed by the Crown, far beyond our budget, and I don't believe that we can hang our hat on the Housing Infrastructure Fund alone and the growth infrastructure targeted rate alone. That won't be enough. We have so many more years of pain, Your Worship, and the critical thing is going to be to ensure that we are fully pricing growth, because the price is much higher than has been budgeted at this point. It's well beyond the capacity of the balance sheet, and we have to acknowledge that, because I don't believe that this is something that the council can do alone, and I'm not sure that any of the debate that I've heard to date is going to bridge that gap sufficiently. But, Your Worship, I am pleased, and following the discussion we had earlier about the rate scenario, I think we've got a better, a more comprehensive suite of options and scenarios out there now. and I'm certainly hopeful that the community that I represent will mobilise to provide the feedback and the submissions necessary to support the living wage policy in particular, because I think it's long overdue.
Thank you very much, Councillor. We are now at about 12:27. We have 4 speakers on the list. I think, given councillors' desire to use their speaking time, it would be better to break for lunch, 12:30, come back at 1:10, just to be precise. And therefore I'll move that we adjourn for lunch. I'd also like, because it is the last council meeting of the year, to invite our executive leadership team and council staff to join us for lunch today. Thank you very much for your patience through this process. If we adjourn now and come back at 1:10. Thank you very much.
Oh, I just have to spin.